One of the other big stories today across the country, the government announcing plans to give loans to pensioners moving into care homes in England so they don't actually have to sell their homes to foot the bill. The money, though, would have to be repaid only after death, and obviously there's an interest element to it. It's part of a plan to deal with the ageing population, but will it work? Frank Cochran is the Managing Director of FSC Investment Services in Wolverhampton. Frank, good evening.
Hi, Frank. How are you doing?
I'm OK, thank you very much. Do you think this is going to work, or a bit cosmetic?
Well, Andrew Dilnot, when he came out with his report last summer, came up with a number of recommendations, and I think this is obviously the government's rebuff to that. To be honest with you, all it's doing is putting people in debt, and that debt somewhere is going to be paid, and it's unfortunately going to come out of the property, isn't it?
Well, it looks like there's no other way than the property, because the debt could be massive, couldn't it, overall?
Well, I think the trick is to avoid the assessment process in the first place, and that's one of the things that we've been doing for about the last sort of 3 or 4 months, because we're specialists in this marketplace. The problem that people have got is that when the government issued the CRAG rules, CRAG, that stands for the Charging for Residential Accommodation Guides, it outlined a number of things that people should really be aware of. The first one is the amount of capital that they own, and the second one is the treatment of certain types of investments. Now, the point about this is that you can have £23,250 worth of assets. However, anything over and above that is going to put you straight into the assessment process. You can get around that, though, by holding guaranteed single premium investment bonds instead. And under the Social Security Commissioner's decision of July 1998, single premium investment bonds are non-assessable. So you could have this strange situation where somebody's sitting there with £26,000 in banks and building societies. They will be assessed, and they will lose a lot of that money to pay for their long-term care. Or you could have somebody sitting there with £23,100 in a bank account and £1 million in bonds and not pay for any care whatsoever. Yeah,
so that's an anomaly. What about the rules and regulations? Are there any on people that might decide in their late 50s, mid-50s, to sell their house and distribute the proceeds of that, or whatever the equity is, to family and friends, as long as they get looked after, and then when the time comes to get care, it's going to be sorted out by the state?
Well, what you're talking about then is getting into what's called the deprivation rules, where they can actually look at the transaction and say, have you done this purely for the purpose of depriving us of the cost of your long-term care? One of the simple things to do is, first of all, get your will done properly and have your property put into tenancy in common rather than owning the property jointly. And this is one of the common ways that we would tell people to start at least the process going. But the main thing is start planning, plan early, and do it properly.
Tenancy in common?
Indeed.
So just explain what that means.
Right. If you speak to the land registry, you'll be able to tell how your property has been registered with them. Most people would have had their property set up through their solicitors as joint owners. Yeah. As a joint owner, effectively, you and your partner would own the entire property between the two of you, so there'd be no dividing line between the value. By transferring into tenancy in common, you put an invisible line between the two halves of the property. So effectively, if a property is worth $100,000, you'd both own $50,000 each. So when they came to do the assessment process and did an attachment to the value of the property, they can only attach the attachment to the 50%, not the whole property. So you can cut your liability in half.
One of the other things is, and what you've just said is interesting in itself, and also about the investment bonds, as opposed to banks and building societies. Yeah. But people who rent anyway will be looked after, because but people who own homes, they could have that money clawed back. So it seems an unfair system. People who actually own homes or have savings, what's the point anymore?
I think the answer to that is choice. If you're going to rely on the state to support you, your choices are very limited. You'll go into a local authority property, which, okay, let's be fair about it, that's going to be run on a budget. My argument is, and what we do for our clients, is to say, let the state pay for your basic cover, which some of them will pay up to £425 a week for that. Then use your assets, take your bonds, use the money from that to top that up, and then you've got the choice of where you stay. And quite honestly, if you've got the money, the more money you spend, the better the quality of care you're going to get.
But from what you've heard today, Frank,
yeah,
is this the way it's going to be? Do you think that the government will have to rethink what they've announced today, or do you think it would work?
I'm just wondering where they're going to get the money to back this up. I mean, with the best respect in the world, they're not going to be able to go to the banks and get it because they're in trouble as it is. So I'd be more concerned to say, well, okay, if they're talking of a sum of money of, say, 35,000 or whatever the figure may be, my main concern would be how they're going to actually fund it. It is better if you take your affairs in your own hands. You've got control. You've got the choice of what you do. Don't rely on the government, because to be honest with you, a change of government could mean a complete change of the system all over again, and you don't want to be the one that's at the back of the queue when they're giving out the places at the care homes.
Yeah, well, that's one of the other aspects. I mean, if councils have got to loan people money to be looked after, to go into care, then you're talking billions of pounds that councils and the government don't have.
Yeah, I just don't see it happening. I mean, we do a guide on our own website that people can download and have a look at, or they can contact us and we'll talk them through the process. But the main thing is, like everything, is choice. If you choose to take the time to plan against this happening to you and your family, effectively you can then sit back and say, okay, all the assets that I've accumulated during my working life, I know are going to go to my family and they're going to go to my kids, rather than the local authority stepping in and saying, well, thank you very much, you've done a great job of creating all this wealth for us to now take and spend on your long-term care, when that wasn't what you designed it to do.
Frank, good to talk to you tonight. Frank Cochran, who's the Managing Director of FSC Investment Services in Wolverhampton.